Welcome to the private life of Peg Lynch. I'm James Lalix, Peg Lynch's shortest fan.
And I am Astrid King, Peg Lynch's tallest and only daughter.
And you might ask, who exactly was Peg Lynch? Well, if you don't know, Peg Lynch was just the first woman to create and to write and to star in both her own radio and then television situation comedy series. Quite an accomplishment. She was a pioneer. She was a groundbreaker. She was a woman in a man's world. You know, that Mrs. Maisel, she had it easy compared to Peg. In her lifetime, Peg Lynch wrote over 11,000 radio and television scripts, alone and unaided, I might add. Her creation was Ethel and Albert, and it became one of America's most popular husband and wife comedies from the day it was first heard in 1938. It was warm, it was fast, it was funny, and it bloomed from a small radio station in Minnesota to ABC in New York, where it soon became a beloved corner of the nation's radio landscape. In the 75 years that followed, Ethel and Albert was heard or seen on either ABC, NBC, CBS, public broadcasting, either on radio or TV or live on stage. Sometimes it was known as The Couple Next Door or The Little Things in Life, but it always starred Ethel and Albert and Peg. Now we have two Pegs for you in this series. Peg herself in some radio interviews that she's done over the years, and also channeling the spirit of Peg as as nobody else can do is her daughter, Astrid.
Yes, I will be playing my mother. But I think after listening to her, as I have for over, I don't want to say how many years, but it's certainly long enough for me to get the gist of the essence of Peg. But I think first we should hear from the great lady herself.
And here's Peg recalling from the distance of many decades later the pivotal moment in her youth when her career was laid before her. Ms. Lynch?
I had an uncle, and he was always sitting in the corner of the dining room with a headset. And I tell you the truth, I didn't know he talked. I didn't pay attention to him, except I was scared of him because he didn't talk. And as I was going through the kitchen from my aunt to the living room, he beckoned to me over, and I was terrified. I didn't know what this man wanted. And as I came over to him, he put his headphones on my ear, took them off and put on my head. And I could hear a lot of crackling. And then all of a sudden, and I was about 5 years old, I heard, "This is KDKA Pittsburgh." That's the first time. And I tell you, it really was exciting even then at that age. And I thought, well, that's what I'm going to do when I grow up, is get my words through the air.
Get her words through the air.
I did do that. And boy, I tell you, it's a damn sight harder than I thought it was going to be, too. And a lot more fun.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Am I talking to Peg or to Astrid?
Who the hell do you think you're talking to, Jamie?
Okay. Well, then, you did have quite the run. All the shows, the decades, all the fans, starting from nothing.
Well, it didn't happen overnight, that's for sure. But nobody ever wants to hear how hard you worked, You think, come on, just get to the funny stuff. Well, I'll do my best. And I suppose my life has been full of funny stuff, mostly, because, life is funny. If you don't have a sense of humor, boy, I don't know where that leaves you. Nowhere, I guess. Alan Bunce and I once received an award for America's Favorite Radio Couple. Well, he was busy, so I went by myself to whatever the event was to be presented with it. When I got back to the apartment later, I took a closer look at it. There were 2 mistakes, 2 typos. Instead of Peg Lynch and Alan Bunce, it read, in big gold letters, Peg Lunch and Alan Dunce. Well, you had to laugh, didn't you? I mean, so much for fame, I didn't dare tell Alan. He would not have seen the humor at all. Well, I called the people right away, and suitably devastated, they sent a corrected award over by cab the next day, which is the one I showed Alan. But I preferred the original, which I had framed and have kept next to my desk all these years as a reminder to never take myself too seriously. I think it's worked. Well, if there is one person who literally can take at least partial credit for my success, for getting my words through the air, it's Dr. Charles Mayo, Dr. Charlie, as we called him. He was one of the dynamic duo, the Mayo brothers, founders of the world-famous Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Mother had been his head nurse in the orthopedic department there before she got married. When I was I wasn't even 1 yet, I know that. This would have been about 1917. Mother took me in to see him, worried sick.
And she said to Dr. Charlie, who was kind of joking all the time, she said, I know what to do with Margaret. She just doesn't eat anything. She's so thin. And he said, maybe she doesn't like the food. I'm sure my mother ignored that. And then she said, well, since she's not talking, she says, she's so mad at everything. She's just clenching her fist. She's just terrible. So he picked me up and examined my mouth. And believe it or not, I was tongue-tied. He said, Chef Francis, she's tongue-tied.
He got out his forceps and some scissors and went snip, 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 and I started talking, and according to Mother, never stopped. And you'll notice, am still going great guns so far. Dr. Charlie said to Mother afterwards that if I grew up and amounted to a row of pins that he wanted credit. Well, I don't know what a row of pins is worth, but here I am. My greatest operation, he said to me many years later. I've never forgotten that, or him. And I have never forgotten either that I was raised in a small town, that I come from generations of hardworking peasants, farmers on all sides, Norwegian, Swiss, Irish, English, Dutch, that my childhood was during the Great Depression, and that it could not have been easy for Mother bringing me up on her own. My father died of what they called the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. He was only 27. My mother never got over his death, and although she didn't always show it, she was a bitter, unhappy woman all her life. She never spoke of him, and my grandmother, his mother, told me never to ask any questions or talk about him at all. Daddy had gone up to heaven, and that was all I needed to know. That's where I'd meet him again. Well, it wasn't all I needed to know growing up. A few discreet talks with my aunt, and it didn't take me long to figure out there would be quite an age difference. I mean, the last time my father had seen me, I was 2. How in hell was he going to know me now, you know? Many years later, I posed the same question to the Reverend Billy Graham, the evangelist. He and I were guests on a talk show somewhere, and we were chatting as we waited in the green room beforehand. I said, well, if we're all going to end up gallivanting around heaven for this glorious family reunion one day, how is my dad even supposed to recognize me? What, he was suddenly going to round a corner and see an old woman with a wrinkled face trying to keep her teeth in and cry, Margaret, at last. Well, Graham thought for a moment, opened his mouth to speak, but just then was whisked away to the set. But he looked back at me over his shoulder and with a smile said, saved by the bell. He was cute. Well, I've still never found a satisfactory answer. The ministers and priests whom I've met casually merely seem amused or give me some double talk about blind faith or eternal hope. But as a result, heaven to me is one gigantic World's Fair with all the billions who have died racing around frantically looking for a familiar face. Cripes, I just hope there's something more to do there. I know I'm going to die one day, but I hate the idea. Well, I hate it for a lot of reasons, but mostly because of all the books I haven't read yet. Better be a library up there is all I can say. I'll bring a magazine, just in case. Well, very briefly now, since biography isn't all that interesting to other people, I was about 6 years old when I became convinced, completely without foundation, that I was adopted. It was a new word. Perhaps I had read it, or heard it through the heating register as the grown-ups downstairs discussed the day's news, which was in fact how I saw them making my Christmas present, a dollhouse, and how I learned that Santa Claus was only the druggist Walter Anderson in a Santa suit. But I pestered Mother incessantly about it, and one day, when she was trying to finish the ironing, she just ran out of patience.
Was I adopted?
Yes, 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 she said. Where did you find me? I said. I found you at an old buggy in an empty lot. Now go outside and get out from underfoot. Well, I was horrified. I went upstairs and I packed a suitcase and walked down to the train station and said I wanted a ticket to St. Paul. It's about 90 miles away. Guess I had money. Well, Mother always left some around the house for housekeeping. Maybe it was my allowance. I don't know. Nothing cost much in those days. Why the station master didn't say anything, I'll never know. But I took the train to Dodge Center. It's about 6 miles away, where I knew I had to change. It was about a 2-hour wait. And I killed time weeding the station master's flower garden. I don't think I've weeded anything since. Then I got on another train. Nobody stopped me. I got up to St. Paul, and this is a big station, too, and I walked through out to where the streetcars were, and I took one over to 42nd and Carpenter, changed again, and got to 888 Grand, to my Aunt Helen's honey, we called her, went up to her apartment on the second floor.
And I rang the doorbell, and Helen opened the door, and she, she said, why, Margaret, what are you doing here? And I said, I've wanted to run away from home because I'm adopted. She said, well, come in. We'll call your mother. We got Mother on the phone. Mother really was, at times, very smart. She just said, well, that was quite a trip, wasn't it? Probably holding her breath. Went up by yourself and changed streetcar. Yes, I remember she said, did you get the right cars when you changed streetcars? I said, well, I'm talking to you, aren't I?
Well, honey bought me a new dress, and Mother came and got me, and that was the end of it. But 6 years old, you know? Poor Mother. She never knew quite what to make of me, I know that. Well, after Dad died, she went back to her nursing job at the Mayo Clinic. Well, she had to. Rochester's only 15 miles away from Casson, where her family home was and into which we'd moved. But in those days, it was too long a commute to make every day, 15 miles. So Mother would take the bus back to Casson on Friday and leave again on Sunday. I missed her, of course, but I had my grandfather. He's a town blacksmith. He was looking after me. And I had 3 teenage aunts coming and going, and the town library. I think I'd read every book in there by the time I was 9. And I had my diary. I suppose that's the first thing I ever wrote. And in it, I'd meticulously record the date and the hour and the circumstances surrounding some small event, usually to do with the fact that everyone was forever saying to me, I'll tell you when you're older.
Then when I was older, I'd go up to Aunt Helen, for example, referring to my diary. On October 15th at 10:20 in the morning, you were standing in your blue apron at the kitchen counter whipping cream, and you and Deanie were laughing, and I said, what are you laughing at? And you both said, we'll tell you when you're older. So what were you laughing at? I'm older now. Notebooks were just filled with that sort of thing. Honey or Deanie or Mother or whoever it was. For goodness sakes, that was 4 years ago, Margaret. I never got any answers to anything. I think that's why I remember so much now, because people never told me anything. I was always too young, and now I'm too old.
Mother did tell me something, though, one day that really clicked. I was one of 6 little girls picked to perform at what we called the Opera House over in Mantorville, down the road. We were supposed to tap dance, sing a little. We had 1 line each, none of which any of us could do. Remember to smile now at the audience, Mother said. And I said, but I can't watch my feet and smile and talk and remember everything all at the same time. This is long before the days of Shirley Temple. But I'm telling you this because what Mother told me was the foundation of my career. She sat me down and pointed to her head, tapping it lightly. Just think of your head as your attic, she said. It's like our attic, full of boxes and files and cupboards and chests of drawers, and when we want something, we climb up there and get it. Clothes, lamps, dolls, decorations, and so on. So your attic, your head, is where you keep things in your own boxes and cupboards until you need them, and they will be there. You just have to open them. Well, that process of remembering has really been the basis of whatever success I've had, because if I need an idea for a script, and boy, I feel sometimes all I've done my whole life is rack my brains for ideas, if it's up there, I can find it again, mostly. Well, it must have worked since I've written over 10,000 scripts by now. Mother and I moved on over to Rochester after Granddad died and the bank repossessed the family home in Casson. We rented a room, 1 room, with a bathroom down the hall to which we'd tiptoe back and forth, terrified of disturbing the landlady. Mother only made $60 a month as a nurse at the Mayo Clinic, and that didn't go far, even in those days. We lived exactly 1 block from school, but I was up every morning at 4 a.m. to study, and I'd be at the gates an hour early, even in winter, scared of being late. Worked hard, studied hard, chewed my nails to the quick. I knew I had to get good grades. Mother expected it. I was bright enough, but it wasn't all clear sailing. My high school drama teacher, I'll never forget her, was a Miss Hurt, aptly named, as it turned out. and in my junior year, she cast me as Puck. None of us knew anything about A Midsummer Night's Dream, or much about Shakespeare. I still don't. But Miss Hurt had read it to us, and as we were walking out of class one day after the cast list had gone up,
Red Hollenbeck, I went to prom with him. His dad later took out President Johnson's gallbladder. Red said to me, "Do you mean we're all fairies in this thing?" I said, "I guess so." And you know, we had sort of grown accustomed to a little tooth fairy that was stealing all our teeth. We didn't know what the hell real fairies did.
certainly not ones in Shakespeare, we rehearsed, nobody understanding a word, and I suppose to give more students a chance, Miss Hurt had double cast the main roles, so Virginia Lyon and I were to share the role of Puck, including the one costume. Now, I was 2 years younger than everyone else, having skipped 2 grades, and I was only a puny little thing to begin with. The costume was miles too big. They had to pin it up everywhere, and the green tights puddled around my ankles. It looked like hell, and I felt like hell in it. Opening night, I was waiting in the wings to make my entrance, the music gaily playing, and I was supposed to leap in and whatever it was. How now, spirit, whither wander, and so on and so on. When suddenly Miss Hurt came up behind me and said,
"You are perfectly terrible. I'm sorry I ever cast you. You are just terrible. I'm just so sorry. Now you get out there and do something." The curtain opened, tears coming down my face. I leaped down these 3 grassy banks and went through the speech. And the only thing is, it taught me one thing. I must have hired about at least 800 people in my life. Never had any trouble with anyone except one. And I learned one thing. You don't get anything out of, at least I learned it, you don't get anything out of people when you yap at them. You just don't.
Miss Hurt wrote to me years later in New York asking for an autographed picture. I sent her one, signed it Puck, the terrible one. Well, about the same time as my Shakespearean debut, 1930, I found out from a classmate, Dave Gentling, that his father had just bought the First National Bank building in town, and like countless other wealthy businessmen across the country who wanted to get in on this new thing called radio, but not knowing the first thing about running a radio station, had promptly opened a radio station in it. It was called KROC, and is still going strong. I persuaded Mr. Gentling to hire me, and that the first thing he needed were sponsors. How I knew this at the age of 14, or how to go about finding them, I don't know. But I trotted around town persuading businesses to advertise with us and then devising their slogans for them.
I still remember one of the commercials, and that was Bisgard Bauer Shoe Store, which was right downstairs. And the slogan was, "Don't spend your life 2 feet away from happiness," which I thought was rather good.
She was working at KROC, K-Rock, as the FM jocks would later love to say.
I was immediately appointed chief copywriter for KROC, chiefly because there was no one else to do it. And I was soon conducting celebrity interviews for the station as well. Not that I'd had any experience in that area either. But Rochester was full of famous people, you see, who'd come to town, and they still do, to go through the clinic. We had about 1,000 people a day in those days, and as I was working there part-time as a desk girl, a receptionist, well, we all worked for the clinic at some point. Hell, the Mayo Clinic ran the town. Anyway, I got to know who was coming and going. Lou Gehrig, baseball player, interviewed him. It was the day after he'd heard the bad news about his back. And William Powell, remember him in The Thin Man? Jeanette MacDonald, the soprano in the movies with Nelson Eddy. Randolph Scott, Newt Rockne, the famous Notre Dame football coach. Never heard of him. I knew nothing about football. Ernest Hemingway. God knows what I asked any of them or what they made of me, but they're all lovely. They were. I never had that awestruck feeling about celebrities that I think has sort of ruined this country. Yeah, it was just fun. Well, my senior year, I ran for class president and lost. Another lesson. Ruth Betcher, a friend who worked in the main office, later told me that Miss Snodgrass, the principal, had thrown handfuls of my votes in the incinerator so that Colin McCarty would win. Collie was the son of a doctor at the clinic. I was only a nurse's daughter. Nice, huh? Well, it made me more determined. I know that. I rented a typewriter, an L.C. Smith, for $10 a month, which Mother thought was extravagant. But I sold a radio play about traffic and then a story to My Romantic Story magazine. It's a pulp thing. The story was entitled My Most Unforgettable Moment, and it was all about my experiences stationed with my husband in Shanghai, the unforgettable moment being when a toothache required a visit to a dentist who turned out to be from my same graduating class back home and who was then instrumental in aiding my husband's and my escape from China. It was a complete fabrication, start to finish, but I was terribly excited to have sold it.
I got a letter first, and it said that the check would be forthcoming for $25 as soon as I signed the enclosed material, which was to verify, to say that this was true, and signed by a minister. And I showed my mother the letter, and I said, "Look, they're giving me $25 for that." Mother said, "For what?" Oh, I hadn't told her. And, of course, it was all a lie. And Mother thought I was the biggest liar in the world. She always did. Mother, we'd go somewhere, and I'd do a script on it, and my mother would say, "Well, it didn't happen that way at all." I'd say, "Yes, it did. It was. I was there." And she'd say, "Well, there are only 4 people there instead of dozens, as you put it." You know, that was a lie. Anyhow, to go back on, and she said, "Well, what are you going to do? You'll have to tell them the truth. Get a minister to sign it." "Well, what minister? You don't go to Sunday school? You don't go to church?" I said, "Well, I'd get Brud to sign it, my boyfriend." Oh, she was horrified. She was just horrified. And she said, I had to drop. I said, "Forget the whole thing." And then I got somebody to sign it saying that it had happened. I said, "Mother, it doesn't matter. They don't care. They're not going to. Mother's idea was that I would be sued and put in jail, and here she was working at the Mayo Clinic, and their reputation of the whole, they'd go down the tube with me, I guess, the Mayo Clinic. Oh, no. So anyhow, I got the check for $25. I did show that to her.
After 2 years of junior college, I headed on up to St. Paul to the University of Minnesota. It's my first time away from home. Mother sent me a 4-leaf clover tucked in a letter to wish me luck. I tell you, she could spot 4-leaf clovers a mile off. I've never seen anything like it. And I still have that one she sent back in 1936 in my wallet. Mostly dust now. But I check on it now and again to see that my lucky charm hasn't fallen out. I wrote home about twice a week, and, well, I did so really for the next 10 years, I guess. Mother saved them all my letters. I don't know what she thought I was going to do with them one day. I'd like to throw them out. Pretty tedious, seems to me. The ones from college all seem to be about promising to get at my laundry, apologizing for the abbreviated state, as I called it, of my fingernails, my desperation to get into a sorority, and always, always, always about my lack of money. Well, I did get into a sorority, Gamma Phi, mostly all rich girls, doctor's daughters. Somehow I made the cut. And I got elected to the National Collegiate Players, it was called, for directing. "It's a great honor, quite a feather to my cap," I assured Mother, with many capitals and exclamation marks, hoping to make her proud. Well, I'm not sure I ever succeeded there. Well, now, Burton Wright, he was my boyfriend at the time, my beau, good-looking guy. He'd been the star of the University Theater, and he'd gone down to Chicago to work on radio. And soon after he got there, it was about 1937, I got a telegram from him, which was cheaper than a phone call. And it said, "I'll be on Lights Out tonight, and we'll get $75. Well, I tell you, we were all thrilled. Burton's getting $75. That was just sort of unheard of for probably what was just a few lines. And so we all listened to the show, everybody in the theater, our whole crowd, and even at the sorority house. But we didn't hear him. He had a beautiful voice, too. But for the life of us, we couldn't tell which one he was. It was a horror show where a lot of protoplasm took over the Earth, and the last thing was there was a little airplane flying through the air that was sucked down into the protoplasm. There was a terrible scream, and that was the end of the world. Well, we couldn't figure out where in hell Burton fit in. Anyhow, he finally called. No one had congratulated him yet, you see. And I said,
"Oh, yes, you were wonderful." And then I couldn't stand it any longer, and I said, "Which one were you? I can't tell, Burton." He said, "I was the scream." Well, that was even more impressive than talking, to think he got $75 for a scream. We were headed for stardom. God, it was funny.
No! We're falling right into it, into the heart!
Well, he's going down to a fiery death, into a mass of poultry protoplasm, but that's not the case with Peg's career. Astrid, what are we going to hear in the next episode?
Well, she's going to get her foot in the door in the world of radio, the new world of radio, and also along the way discuss books with a well-known figure from the underworld.
That's the next episode of The Private Life of Peg Lynch. The Private Life of Peg Lynch was written by Astrid King and produced by Alex King.